Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast, is supported by a generous grant from the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust. If you would like to contribute to our on-the-ground conservation initiatives and our conservation internship and mentorship programs here in North Dakota, please consider making a donation to us through our member support link on our Spotify page. Your contributions will directly support the Walsh County Three Rivers Soil Conservation District, where this year we will plant over 10,000 trees and several hundred acres of conservation grass, pollinators, and cover crops, while also offering hands-on conservation job training to our high school and college interns. You can also support our efforts by liking, reviewing, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Thank you. Welcome to Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast. In today's episode, we consider the importance of living roots. As a soil health principle, living roots not only prevent soil erosion, but also foster a healthy soil ecosystem with the intricate network of mycorrhizal fungi and a host of microbial species that play a big role in healthy soil function. Today's episode also considers the metaphorical side of living roots, as we ask how living roots can help us to remember our own histories and the cultural side of agriculture. Both of today's guests share personal stories about how they have learned to honor and inherit lessons from their roots and from the diverse cultural roots that continue to grow here on the prairie. In our first segment, join us for a tour of Steve Enger's farm to learn how the fourth-generation Norwegian farmer has implemented diverse soil health practices in North Dakota's Red River Valley. The tour is a live-action segment where you'll hear us crunching through his barley field, digging for earthworms in his multi-species cover crops, and bouncing around dirt roads in his pickup, where he keeps his shovel and other tools for getting his hands dirty as he learns from his soil. At the end of the tour, join Steve and I at his farmhouse for lunch, where he served me generous helpings of zucchini hot dish, lush garden salad from his home garden, homemade apple crisp from his crabapple trees, and fresh pressed grape juice from his grape vineyard. Between the sounds of our forks scraping across the plates, you'll hear Steve discuss why he adopted soil health practices into his operation and what he hopes other farmers in the region can learn from his successes and failures. Stick around after my lunch with Steve for an in-depth conversation with my friend, Dr. Aubrey Streit Krug, who earned her PhD in Great Plains Studies at the University of Nebraska. Aubrey currently leads the Perennial Cultures Lab at the world-famous Land Institute, founded by Wes and Dana Jackson in 1976, where they have been developing innovative approaches to perennial grains research. Without further ado, let's head out to the field with local farmer Steve Enger. I was listening to Joe Salatin, the farmer who's had some viral talks about this kind of work on the way to come and see you, and he said that on their farm they try to respect the pigness of the pig, the chickenness of the chicken. and in some ways it seems like you're trying to learn how to respect the soilness of the soil. It's this complex and simple.
Well, we've done everything possible to destroy the soil.
Yeah.
But listening to this Rick Bieber the other day, he just said it's just so important to You know, you can change your whole system in 5 years if you have all of these practices in place.
Yes.
And it takes a multi-species cover crop every year. And he said you don't need a ton of it on having one, you know, here, there, and it'll do the job.
Well, you mentioned something out there that is something that I'm curious about. You said that it's fun to get down and do the kind of handing. Yeah, and you also had mentioned earlier that there's something maybe strange about you as a farmer.
Well, most people don't carry a spade in their pickup to go out there and look.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting to see that you got worms life. You got worms out there. You got that life. That would be one of the indications that you've got biology in your soil.
Yeah.
You got the worms.
Yeah. You also mentioned that was your great-great-grandfather's homestead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where were they coming from?
They came from Norway.
Norway, yeah, like me too. A couple landlocked Vikings here.
Yeah.
He farmed too, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they did, and then his son took over. Now his son would have been my mother's father.
Yeah.
And then it was my mother's side of the family.
Okay.
And then I inherited it from my mother, and then so we're hopefully leaving the land better than when we took it over.
Sure.
You know. Yeah. You know, we're doing no-till, which is probably not, very common in this area. There's a lot of reduced tillage, but there is not the extent of no-till.
Yeah, there's more strip till.
You have to have, the first thing you need, when you start this process, is to leave the cover. To keep your cover on your surface, and then all of this stuff will gradually come to play over time, but it's eliminating I don't know if you're familiar with the 5 or the 6 principles of soil health. It's the least disturbance. It's whether it be with iron, iron on, with the tillage, or whether it's chemicals or whatever it is, it's whatever it is, it's a disturbance of your soil. And the longer you can keep the cover on your soil, having new food, or always having the food for them to eat, it's all part of the whole system going on.
Yeah. So least disturbance is one of the principles of soil health. What's another?
Oh yeah, and then keeping the cover on there, cover crop. If you got livestock intervention is another real plus.
Yeah.
But
and so that mixture again, you had flax, oats, rye, barley, sunflowers.
Yeah. It's
and the expectation it'll be frost killed, but it'll help maintain the moisture and build microbial life in the soil.
Yes. And that is the spreader that we spread it with, that compost.
Oh, okay.
It'll take us 40-foot swath.
Okay. So this is a barley field?
Yeah, this is barley when we use the stripper head on it. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not.
Stripper head.
You can see there's some plating on here where it breaks apart.
Oh,
there are, for that amount of rain, it's not much. It's pretty dry. But anyway, it's. Are there any worms in here?
And so this is being left as a cover.
Yep. And it's you've got aggregates in here, so you're gonna look at the the roots in here.
Yeah. I was really impressed with the nodules, the nodes in that
Yeah.
soybean
Oh yeah.
field.
Yeah.
you
Here
know.
we got a worm. Here we got worms.
Oh yeah.
They're right to they're eating that. Look at here. You got the juveniles in here.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
Just the small ones here.
Yeah. And you were mentioning the way you can tell if it's
band.
It's the band that determines if it's an adult.
Yeah. You got a band around the body.
The earthworm. Yeah.
But anyway, look at here. You know, these are all smaller ones. But anyway, they're having a heyday here now with the moisture and then all of this root stuff.
And so has this been a no-till field for a while then?
Yeah, and it has had livestock grazed on it.
Okay.
And that's another beneficial part of the whole system. So the microbes, if you've got active biology, the microbes will feed the plant the amount it needs and just in time for it when it needs it.
Yes. So if you were to impart your wisdom on what you've learned, I guess, what would be something you'd want people to learn from your experience?
Don't be scared to try. You know, I mean, it's so important that you try to improve your soil health. But most people feel that they are doing the job that they should be doing.
Sure.
That they don't need to change.
Sure.
But I think there's a lot of soils that are, at some point in time, will not be farmable if you don't make changes.
Yeah. When you're out there now, and you said that it's a continuous learning process for you, what are some of the more recent things that have opened your eyes? Or
well, you know, it is. I think after that meeting we had on Wednesday, is to pay it isn't just planting a cover crop. It's just you need to have as many species as you can. And the other thing is you don't have to have a lush crop as long as you've got a presence of a different species in there. It could be, because of the function underground will take care of that. They'll interchange each other.
Yeah. That communication network of the mycorrhizal kind of fungus. Yeah. That's really something that's opened my eyes a lot, I think. There's just
and then the other thing is that it's this Bieber from South Dakota said as long as they're just even peeping out of the ground, it's beneficial. I was just going to put some rye in on my edible bean field, but it kind of changed my thinking that we need to add more species, and just a small amount will take care of the job.
I noted that there were a lot of different animal tracks out there too. It seems like, it's a farm operation, and that's kind of first and foremost, but I noticed that there's deer tracks out there. Yeah. There's signs of other wildlife and critters and pollinating species, and I saw a number of bees and butterflies, and so it seems like this, when you think about soil health, it kind of grows the health for almost everything else.
Yes, it does.
As much as it's nice for you to be unique out here, how do we make this more universal, having more people do this kind of thing? Is there any idea as to how you get that accomplished?
Basically, they have to have a want or a need, something that's going to trigger them to do something different. Unless that happens, most of these people are not going to change. A few of them will be. Basically, I'm an early adapter to different things, but most people aren't, especially when it comes time to make some major changes. Most people are scared to fail. And the other thing is, what are the neighbors going to say,
Sure.
I really don't care,
Yeah. Well, failure almost has to be an allowable part of it, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You're not going to win all the time.
Thanks to Steve for taking us on a tour of his farm. We'll hear more from him in future episodes, where he'll discuss how he uses manure and composting systems to rejuvenate the soil health in his fields. Now we turn to my conversation with Dr. Aubrey Streit Krug. Aubrey is a writer with a PhD in Great Plains Studies, where she combined the study of Great Plains literatures with the study of prairie plants and the indigenous Omaha language. The cross-pollination of stories and science, family histories and the stories of indigenous peoples of Kansas and the broader Great Plains has shaped her approach to directing the Perennial Cultures Lab at the Land Institute. In a 2022 essay for ASAP Journal, Aubrey writes about her blended approach to learning and unlearning about the region she calls home. As she explains, quote, "I started to read the landscape's history, the lines of settlement, and the dynamic layers of persistence, studying plant names, vegetation types, ecological interactions, browsing herbarium specimens, and helping light prescribed burns." To read Aubrey's essay is to learn that to read land is a constant process of learning and unlearning. In a powerful passage, she discusses the challenges of unlearning and advocates for becoming undisciplined in order to become open to new ways of knowing and learning from and with the land. As she explains, unlearning is messy, not tidy. For me, becoming undisciplined is not about being more or less academically disciplined. It's about recognizing what underlies all disciplines, about listening below the common sense surface, about willing participation in and devotion to land communities. In my case, grassland communities, characterized by perenniality and diversity, deep stability, and heart-wrenching change. I really enjoyed my conversation with Aubrey, and I think you will too. How has Great Plains literature and arts influenced your current work? And I'm thinking of this, I don't know how often you got this kind of question, but I certainly got the question, what are you going to do with that? When I told people I was going to be a literature major, I'm going to study literature. I'm going to be I'm going to read books and I'm going to be, a writer or try to be a writer, creatively, scholarly, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I definitely have gotten that question too at many points. Although anyone who's ever seen me drive a tractor would really understand that I'm called to be a writer and not a farmer. So people get that. I've been a bookworm my whole life, for sure, even growing up in a really tiny farming community. And I think that that sense for me of discovery of I really care deeply about this land and how people are able to feed ourselves sustainably here, and what a good and more just human future could look like in relationship to the land of the Great Plains, and really realizing that there could be a way to learn about this place and to be part of realizing that future. It's been really exciting, even if I'm not, a producer or a farmer or a rancher. And I think that kind of choice has shaped my path. And I'm really grateful for the truly interdisciplinary or maybe even transdisciplinary kind of understanding of the literature and language and cultures of the Great Plains that have been part of my work, because I think, like me in graduate school, we were really thinking about studying literature in relationship to ecology and plant ecology and human communities, and not as a separate discipline just off to the side, but is really integrated with multiple approaches and ways of knowing. And I think that even during graduate school, I was based in an English program, but because of the Great Plains Studies program you mentioned earlier, I was also meeting with folks who were ecologists and collaborating with them. I spent several years, was really lucky to study a language of the Great Plains, and work on contribute to a collaborative textbook project about that, which was really a community engaged process that was really informative and educational and humbling. So that was with the Omaha language, or Omaha Yete. And then, through the literary study, thanks to the one of my advisors and chair in graduate school is Fran Kay, who I know you've met, and her work on thinking about the stories of the Great Plains and understanding how we could imagine and realize the Great Plains as places that aren't deficient, that aren't missing things, but that are actually sufficient, and really finding beauty and power and a sense of plenty in the land of this region. I think all of these things have made it really possible for me to start to build and imagine the kind of cultural and educational research work that I do now. And Wes and Dana Jackson co-founded the Land Institute back in 1976. And Wes's work and from New Roots for Agriculture, his book where he was envisioning perennial agriculture, perennial ag and culture, kind of together, all of these have made it really possible for me to be able to have a place like the Land Institute exist that I can come to, where I can really think about what it means to weave together story and culture with community and with science. I get the privilege of working with incredible natural scientists, as well as civic scientists, as well as community members, and I think the diversity of perspectives and ways of knowing are really inspiring for me.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Perennial Culture program that you are the director of?
Sure, yeah. So the Land Institute is this agricultural nonprofit that is really devoted to figuring out how to work with a lot of different people and places around the world to realize what could be diverse and perennial grain agroecosystem. So thinking about plants and cropping systems that are deeply rooted and that can endure over time, and sustain the ecological processes that sustain the planet while also feeding people and providing these staple foods and being nourishing and cared for by these communities. And so that means the Land Institute's work, again, really collaborative, involves plant breeding, it involves ecology, it involves collaborations, it involves thinking about working with farmers and supply chains, and it involves a lot of people. And the people part is really where my work is focused in this Perennial Cultures Lab. So, we're thinking about cultures, we're thinking about ways of life and being and values and meaning and stories. And we're really interested in how more perennial agricultures and perennial grain systems can actually feed cultures that can be perennial too, that can endure in place and that can be materially sustained by these perennial plants. We're really interested in thinking about how to support that kind of cultural change and how that relates to the agricultural change that we're pursuing, again, in collaboration with a lot of different people. So the Perennial Cultures Lab is really kind of investigating that relationship between cultural and agricultural change. And we develop different community learning and research methods, like civic science, where we work with people to engage with them in the research process and help them get to know perennial grain crops. We develop different educational resources and materials. We study past and present human relationships to perennial plants and perennial grains, and we do a lot of building collaborations and partnerships.
Yeah. Sounds like you wear many hats and you're doing lots of different things. So thinking perennially sounds like a pretty radical shift in some ways in terms of how you're approaching growing community and working with a host of different folks in your region. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Perennial Culture program works with local communities, including Native communities?
Yeah, I think you're right that first of all, we recognize that the kind of dominant cultures that many people, including myself, live in are really fed and sustained by annual grain crops. And that influences our kind of cultural systems and institutions. And I think shapes how our economies work and how we behave and relate to each other. And by working with people who bring a diversity of perspectives and experiences, we have the chance to kind of see the culture that we're part of, but also to imagine alternatives and to remember and renew alternatives too. So some of the community work that we do is decentralized, including working with civic scientists who are across the United States, and they're each situated in their homes and their particular locations. And so getting to know people in those places has been really fun for us. We have a local nature area that's open to the public, and so we have a lot of community interaction and chance for people to start to get to know us through that work. But probably the main thing that I'll point you to is that as part of developing the Perennial Cultures Lab, we've also created a new role and effort in land relations, which is a new thing, but makes sense as long as we are the Land Institute, thinking about how we as an organization relate to land, been really important. So we hired a new staff member into our lab this year. Her name is Amy June Briesman. She's wonderful. And her role is really about initiating and deepening connections with the communities who are especially in our kind of home hub here in the Central Great Plains. And that includes initiating conversations and relationships and projects with Indigenous nations, the people whose homelands that we're in, that we haven't had those relationships before. So I think it's focusing on sort of doing an even deeper dive to study where we are, to really understand that, and to then, once we have done that homework, and as we do that homework, to use what we're learning from that to think about what we have to offer and what we have to learn and what we can do to repair and renew some of those relationships, and think about what that means for our work, with the hope that that can then influence and shape the kinds of relationships that we're supporting with land for other people and other places too.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so fascinating, that effort. And I mean, the land relations position sounds like something that grows out of a background in Great Plains studies. Like that you can have a sort of imagining of such a position through that kind of training, that land relations it's a real viable position for us to have, in our organizations.
And I think that having recognizing that being able to not only initiate a relationship, but to show up for it over time means that we really need to invest in the capacity to show up for and be part of community life. And that's been a part of the Land Institute's, history, definitely over the past 45-ish years, dating all the way back to 1976. And it's changed and evolved through time. And I think we're now in another era of that, of going deeper and broader. And it feels really exciting.
One thing that I kind of wanted to just follow up on or add to this question. So, I moved back to my hometown this winter to take on this position with the Soil Conservation District, and I've been kind of implementing a number of things. We've got like a grant for making a wildlife documentary in our watershed. We're making this podcast called Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast, and we're doing this kind of effort to do outreach through some of my connections nationally, regionally, and locally, and kind of finding those voices, but also really working with young people. So we're building like a local internship programs through our high schools, and through bringing back some college students who are like coming back to work for us in the summer, but not just thinking of them as like hired help to do just kind of the heavy lifting work that we have for like planting trees and grass, but also getting some of the training and grant writing and in being like watershed technicians and that kind of work. So this is all to not just to sing our praises, but actually to ask you guys, what are some of the ways in which you're trying to think in that perennial way, in a generational way?
Yeah, and through the Land Institute's history, there have been a variety of different kind of educational and training programs, and we're currently thinking about what those will look like going forward. Right now, we do have like research assistant positions that often bring in people who are coming from different generations. Our staff is really multi-generational, and those kind of provide pathways and training opportunities for people. And then we also are working on creating a variety of kind of formal and informal educational materials. So I mentioned our civic science program, which we have a lot of educational material as part of that to support people in participating in the scientific research. And we hear from civic scientists that who also range in age, that they sometimes are doing things like watching these videos with their kids when they're managing their plot, or they're interacting with their community garden or neighborhood about this. So I think that is one way we've engaged. And then we are also creating some formal educational materials, especially for high school students and teachers, but that can be adapted for younger audiences as well as for college students. And so those provide some different opportunities as well. But this is something that's on our minds as we're thinking about how to continue to make those connections across generations, because I think that's really where the work of culture happens, as people become like enculturated and learn like the stories, learn the meaning, learn the values. And it's often, as you were describing in your programs, through that sort of hands-on like experiences that are repeated over time, and that involve a sense of community and participation in a group. I think those are all really important ways that we know people learn and that we can support people in learning.
Given all these roles, like what does a day in the life look like for you?
Well, I mean, my main responsibilities are directing the lab, this group. So I lead our strategy and our research and support the people, which are the team of people who do the work of perennial cultures. I had a hard time thinking of a typical day, but I can just name some of the things I've done this week to paint a picture. So I started off the week by traveling to St. Louis with my colleagues to visit a research center where we were convening a meeting about silphium, integrifolium, rosinweed, this prairie plant that the Land Institute is working to domesticate as a future oilseed crop, a perennial oilseed, working again with people from across the US and around the world. So it's sort of really international. Folks from Argentina were there, as well as people from across the US, all these different sort of researchers, and some of my colleagues and collaborators who are doing research with us around silphium ethnobotany. So we heard research presentations and I met with them about ethnobotany research. We did a civic scientist site visit. We went to a community garden in St. Louis where one of our civic scientists, who is older, is growing silphium. She's been a very perennial civic scientist. She's been growing this for years. So we went out, researchers visited her plot and heard her story. And I had a lot of meetings and meals with colleagues. We came back, and since then I've been doing some reading and writing around the project I'm working on related to our research. I've sent a ton of emails. We're recruiting for a new civic science project, so connecting with people. I met with some other international collaborators in Norway, actually started to plan for an upcoming talk. I have some outreach events, so coordinating some of those type of things, doing conversations like this, and then a lot of meetings with the president of the organization. I had my catch up with her about our strategy, managing project updates with my team about things they're working on. So yeah, and in the midst of all that, I'm really looking forward to ending today with a walk out on our prairie remnant. I really try to make sure a week doesn't go by without me walking down that trail. It rained today, so it's really damp and beautiful here. So yeah, a lot of maybe thinking and computer work, a lot of collaborating with people work, a lot of reflecting, and then a lot of hopefully a little bit of time at least in the field interacting with plants.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like such a rich and diverse range. I mean, it seems like it's modeled on the prairie. You have so many different roles that you're playing and so many different, like, almost seasons in a week that you're kind of adapting to, and lots of different work. It I often say that, like, I've had to be like kind of a Swiss Army knife in my role, and having these various roles. And at one minute I'm planting grass with a grass seeding tractor, and another minute I'm writing an article for local papers, or mentoring somebody in how to write a grant for, and so there's that kind of adaptation. I wonder if that isn't something we can pat ourselves on the back for growing up on the prairie. I mean, that might be something that we're compatible in that way, or who knows how that came into being. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're located today?
Yeah. So I made my way back to the Great Plains. I think my whole life, except for 1 year, I've lived in Kansas or Nebraska. I grew up here in Kansas, and I've been back here since finishing graduate school. So I'm today in my office, which is at the Land Institute. It's right near the banks of the Smoky Hill River, right in the middle of Kansas, near Salina. So this is mixed grass prairie country. This is, in deep time where these prairie communities have evolved over thousands of years, with fire and grazing in these really diverse and perennial communities. It's where Native peoples have hunted and gathered and fished in the river right down there. And this is, Kaw homelands, Pawnee, Osage. So variety of Siouan and Caddoan peoples have really known this land. And it's land that has been mostly converted to grain agriculture, annual grain agriculture. And now we're here in a place where research is happening about what perennial grain agriculture could look like. So, maybe like everybody does in their places, I feel like I'm really located at the heart of the world here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really rich and vivid description, and it's like very clear that your training in Great Plains studies has paid off. You've got a rich, deep background in where you are. I think that's to me, that was always a real question. Where are you from? Or where are you? And that's something that I remember bringing with me throughout academic travels, and it not being as meaningful to everyone that I encountered, but to me, like, being from North Dakota was always such an important factor. So few of us, I meet so few of us out in the world, out in the wild.
It's a complicated thing to be, I'm the descendant of, German immigrants who came to Kansas in the late 19th century to farm. My family still farms and ranches, grew up in a really tiny town here in Kansas that's pretty much all German Catholic. And so what it means to be from this place as a pretty relative newcomer, and then to try to reckon with and understand the much richer and complex and beautiful and kind of unsettling history of people's relationship to this place, and figure out what that means. I think it's a kind of complicated sense of belonging.
This conversation is reminding me of the piece that you published recently, I think last year, about the value of being undisciplined, or the role of being undisciplined. And can you maybe speak to that a little bit, of that? What does that entail, given this transdisciplinary approach that you're describing, that's kind of weaving together or braiding together these different ways of knowing? I'm curious to know, like, what does it mean to be undisciplined, and why might that be something we advocate for, or how would you characterize that, I guess?
Yeah, I contributed an essay to a kind of cluster of essays around this idea of becoming undisciplined. And I organized my story, which you can link to or share, with the idea of what it means to kind of cross a threshold into prairie, and how I really, growing up, kind of took for granted, or didn't really even see or understand as a parent, the prairie around me, which still persists. I mean, so much land here in the central Kansas is in annual grain production, and there's plenty of pastures and remnants and places where prairie persists. But I really didn't know what that meant, and I was motivated, of course, as I've been describing, to try to learn and engage that. And I also think that growing up in a small town that has really valued education, and then, having the honor of being able to go to graduate school, I really was thinking about how knowledge is something you're sort of adding to. You're constantly like building knowledge and developing knowledge, and sort of these ideas of being disciplined, of being really rigorous about growing in your knowledge. But I think that what I've learned about through engaging with the prairie, and through, being a settler who has had the chance to learn a little bit about indigenous communities and cultures and literatures, I think it has really taught me in a really humbling way about how it's not just about gaining knowledge. It's also, in order to see something new or differently, you have to kind of let go of what you thought you knew. Of who you thought you were, or what you thought was that's the whole story. It's not the whole story. And I think that, that's a lesson I think I'm still learning from the prairie today and every day, is that kind of sense of humility of this lineage that you're being part of, and the joy at learning, but also that kind of sense of grief of learning your small place in the big scheme of things in terms of deep time and these really powerful systems and forces, and that sense of grief, of realizing our smallness, our mortality, our pride, our ego, and being able to let go of some of those things in order to really engage with the prairie, the more than human and human, the community who is still here, and having that kind of courage to play our part in this moment as part of these much broader stories that we can listen to and we can tell. But I think that sense of being undisciplined is kind of a willingness to, instead of deciding the path that you're going to take, to find the path that you're being maybe called to.
I thought that was such a beautiful piece that you wrote, and also just the way that you brought that out and helped me to see that my own educational journey was not just a process of growth, but also of loss. It feels weird to say thank you for that, because it also was in some ways kind of painful to be reminded of that. There is that wound that comes from the learning of, some of my heroes did things. My grandpa helped to build the Garrison Dam that flooded out the Mandan and Rikara and Adatsa, and he was for sure a hero of mine. But then there's also this deep wound that later in life I would discover that through my graduate work and training in some Great Plains literature and a focus on Native American and indigenous literatures, primarily of the Great Plains. And one of the kind of things that this also made me think of is just recently at the farmstead where I live here, the yard lamp went out and we lost the yard lamp, and it allowed me to see the sky in a way that I had not. The night sky became immediately much more brilliant and beautiful, but also more it was more certain that I am not very big on the prairie. Immediately there was that awareness. And there's a family of fox that live right here. I've watched these fox kits grow. I've listened to coyotes surrounding us, or coyotes as we pronounce that word here. And there's been that kind of sonic tension that I awake to, or I fall asleep to the sound of coyotes, and I wake to the sound of the fox still there. And there's that kind of harmony and disharmony that I experience here. And the other thing that I just picked up on that you were saying is sort of the temporal disharmonies that are possible on the prairie. There's like I remember being so inspired by Thinking Like a Mountain by Aldo Leopold in a Sand County Almanac, and being like, wow, that really, opened my eyes to this new idea of thinking in this geological deep time, while also thinking about the howl of a wolf. And I had this particular experience of getting to read that and experience that while working briefly on the reintroduction of the gray wolf project in Yellowstone. And but I feel more and more that I'm much more like a mayfly, like I have like the lifespan of like this 5 minutes of this brilliant, hard to take in life, and trying to grasp what it is to think like a mountain. And in some ways, thinking like a prairie is even more, it's this strange thing that feels like I should understand it because I grew up here. But the more that I am back here in this role, in some cases, literally watching grass grow is my job, where I've like planted it and now I have to watch it grow. The more I'm humbled by how little I know. I mean, it happens all the time and I don't know if I can form a question out of that really, other than it's just that idea of being undisciplined, and that idea of having that loss along with that growth. I guess the prairie is also a teacher in that way. It's like teaching me how to grapple with both of those things, or all of those things at once. Which I guess leads to a question: is what lessons have you learned from the prairie? What are some of the lessons that you have learned, or are you continuing to learn from the prairie?
I think that lesson about that you're speaking to, about the kind of creative tension between stability and change, really, like something about that really sticks with me, because when I think about what endures, and we think about these prairie ecosystems, including their relationship to humans, of course, as part of prairies, and the way that these perennial plant communities, really characterized by these roots that allow these living roots that allow these plants to persist in place and to hold on to and build soil, with prairie fires, with grasshoppers and bison and elk grazing them, and this incredible, diversity of species in the face of really, arid, semi-arid climates, and sort of all the things that characterize the Great Plains and the people who are part of these systems as well. And I think I often have thought of them as like looking for lessons of what can last, and how to hold on. But I mean, if we look at in different scales at prairie ecosystems too, I think there's so much that's changing. Every day there's a different cast of color on the prairie. The plants are coming and going, above ground and blooming, not, and the seeds are moving. They're navigating through time and space, and certainly at larger scales, we can think about all kinds of change, both cyclical and kind of catastrophic and chaotic. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that we can look to the plants and the natural ecosystems around us for these kinds of philosophical lessons, stories, metaphors. And I think that we're seeing them through this human lens. And I think that part of our job is also then to think about what those stories and metaphors and lessons are revealing to us back about who we are and what we value or not, what we're able to see or not. And so I think that we have to turn some of those questions back to ourselves about what we're looking to learn, and what we're willing to learn. And I think that has been the kind of maybe the practice of being a writer and a reader, but also a listener and a human being, that I continue to bring to someone living here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast. Thank you to Steve Enger and Dr. Aubrey Streit Krug for joining us today. Special thanks to Matthew Connolly for the theme music, and to Krista Fiala for producing today's episode. We hope you will join us next time for another episode of Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast. Common Ground, a Prairie Podcast, is supported by a generous grant from the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust. If you would like to contribute to our on-the-ground conservation initiatives and our conservation internship and mentorship programs here in North Dakota, please consider making a donation to us through our member support link on our Spotify page. Your contributions will directly support the Walsh County Three Rivers Soil Conservation District, where this year we will plant over 10,000 trees and several hundred acres of conservation grass, pollinators, and cover crops, while also offering hands-on conservation job training to our high school and college interns. You can also support our efforts by liking, reviewing, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Thank you.